Okay, so wanted to quick ask, so how many have had experience with honeybees, bees, native bees? Okay, and permaculture? Anybody with any much kind of understanding of it? This isn't, exactly. This will not be a total class in it. I use some of the strategies and techniques of permaculture. I've gone to classes on a number of things, but I'll go into permaculture in a little bit. And chickens, you know, I know he put that down too. Anybody with chickens here? All right.
I had chicken yesterday.
Yeah. Okay, we could go with that if we need to. So this was something I pulled out of this. I do like this. If you're permaculture, they have this magazine that'll come out. I don't get it regularly, but so it said, learning to slow down and reconnect with your bioregion. And we have many bioregions here in Denver as a front range. We've got desert, high desert, wind, and we're going to experience later on, I'm afraid. It says, our awareness of the seasons, the climate, the plants, animals, and fellow people that inhabit our areas can enhance our lives in many ways. And I started out talking about that because, you know, I grew up in a small town, western Nebraska, and you had a sense of community there and involvement with what went on. And we yearn for that sort of thing, you know, making connection, whether it's with our neighbors, but a lot of connection with the land we miss out on, or flowers, plants, insects, whatever that is. So when I ended up buying this house, little house in Golden in the end of 2010, it has about a fifth of an acre, which is a small lot as urban lots go, 1,200 square foot house. And it was just turf. In the back, in the front, it was all landscape fabric. A lot of it was with 6 inches of the gravel for various things. And the other part of it were, you know, you have like a non-fruiting crabapple tree, that kind of landscaping, which, you know, growing up the way I did, you had food everywhere, but you also understood how we interact with the land and how important the soil is. And when I bought it, I really wanted to take on this understanding. And one of the first books, which I'll bring up, and I'll have if we end up with a table or someplace, we can set some of these out. But Gaia's Garden, and we can pass it around if you want, or we'll have it set up. But it's a simplified look at the permaculture. They have a ethics, strategies that they introduce. And a lot of it is looking at what your microclimate is like, where the wind channels, where your sun energy is, where it's too much or where it's not quite enough, how your water comes. So understanding this in your yard or wherever you're growing is really helpful for how things grow. Now, I'm not going to go into a heavy amount of permaculture actually, the design features and so on, but I would recommend if you have any interest at all, and you can see with this book, I mean, you know a book's been handled a lot when everything's a little bit dog-eared and checked off, and you know, the list of plants that I saw in there all went into what I did with my space. So as I rehabilitated the soil and the strategies I used. So I'm going to talk about that in just a second. I remember my first garden, which was in North Platte, Nebraska, and there was just a little garden area, and I moved in there and thought, garden area, I can plant my own, and everything grew huge. And I thought, oh, gardening's really easy. And then I found out this is a gardener that had taken care of the soil, he'd amended it, you know, everything was perfect that year. And somewhere after this, I moved to 8,000 feet in Pine, Colorado. I thought, I'll garden. And I said, and you know, you have decomposed granite. You praise dandelions because they're green and yellow, right, and non-toxic. but it was what really grew, that and rhubarb. In Pine, Colorado, I ended up being part of the first fundraising kind of day for the North Fork Volunteer Fire Department. And we had two things that grew a lot that we could name the Pine Festival: rhubarb and lilacs. So we went with rhubarb because you couldn't eat lilacs. And so anyway, understanding what grows, where it grows is a big help. I got my first green tomato ripened at 8,500 feet. It took me a lot of energy, and I stopped doing tomatoes there. But anyway, after moving to this area, I was really excited to do all these things. So after looking at what insects could be attracted, what was beneficial to my own use, but to the land, and this is where bees come in, because everything I decided to grow had to be bee-friendly, soil-friendly, friendly to us. We also graze on all of our plants, on our herbs and things like that. I have spent a lifetime just interested in medicinal herbs, so it was a great experiment to grow as many things as I possibly could. So I wanted to, you'll understand, I got started. So right now in my little space, I have 4 by 8 raised beds built with 2 by 6 pine. I have 4 hugelkultur beds. Does anybody here know what those are? They're from Germany. It's a forestry technique of using branches and wood products that are have fallen, that can be stacked up or used. So what we had decided, and I have a group that we garden together and support each other in this, but every time we get our spring storms, the branches that are everywhere, so I stack them all up, stomp them all down, throw a bunch of wood chips on them, get some nitrogen sources, whether it's manure or leaves, anything that's green, anybody who's composted, you have that mix of brown and green to get that activated. And so I have about 4 or 5 hugelkultur beds. I finally this year got a little carried away with all of our storms. I'm having somebody haul off some branches and sticks. It's hard for me to do, but I cannot make another one of these piles of, luckily I have a son who is happy to jump on them and break them all down. So I have the 4 beds like that. I have the 4 hugelkultur beds. And the rest is an area that I did by making, it's called lasagna gardening, deep mulch. And we did it, you put down a nitrogen, which in this case there's a horse farm not too far. I think it's called Silver Quarter Stables, and they do not medicate or treat the grasses and what's on there, and the hay they bring in is clean. You have to make sure there's not contaminants in that, but I will use that manure. So on this land on the backyard, a layer of the manure, a thick layer of cardboard, a little bit more manure, and then 13 inches of wood chips. Literally, sometimes even 15 inches. So anybody who tries to do this strategy with 3 or 4 or 5 inches, it's not really going to work. And after the next year I grew stuff, the next year better stuff, it breaks down, you get that. But I have no bindweed in any of this. I have no thistles in any of it. I choose what I'm going to grow in this area. Maybe it's, I don't know. What do you think a backyard is? 30 feet by 40 feet or something. And growing around what our yards can be like as far as the thistles or bindweed. Now on the edges where I didn't do any of this stuff, I have plenty of bindweed. It's very happy to be rehabilitating all the soil over there, but I've created, by conscious effort, a soil system that will support the microbes and so on, which brings me up to this little book here, Teeming with Microbes. And I really like this because it kind of went in depth of why it's so important to support all of the growth in that. The mycelium, which takes the nutrients from the compost, feeds it to the roots of the plants. Plants can break down in a healthy cycle. So everything that I do in this yard that started out with, I hope I can finally grow something after all these years, and working to, I guess that was part of one of the focus that I said. When I decided to do some of this, I wanted to help the bees, support that, and I wanted to heal the soil. Because I feel like we've come so far away from understanding what holistic connections to nature is. We can do it in our yards and we can do it, but it helps us to understand how it works and how important it is and how we can be important in that cycle. So I get things like this and things like these were probably the first two. I have a few other favorite books that I like. And then I brought this along because I wanted to use one story. It says, can fungi, which also can be pronounced fungi, everybody gets their own choices, save the bees? Now what they found is bees, and I actually saw this firsthand, that bees feed on the mycelium that is growing in the wood chips and things, and it supports their digestive systems, their immune systems. And I was out front where I have sort of a compost pile or a mini place, what I do, and I saw first of the season, and I saw all these bees down there, and going back, and I thought, there's no pollen there, there's nothing there sweet that they're going after. What is it that they're doing? And then I came across this. Paul Stamets, if anybody does any reading on that, has done great research in that area. But it was exciting to be part of the process, to see it, to question it, to understand that all these things that we don't realize are making such a positive impact on whatever's going on. So it's a little hard to accept all critters into your holistic gardens. For instance, like, who knows what tomato hornworms look like? Anybody? They're like the size of your finger, and they're green, and they have these little places on the tail that looks like a horn, which is where hornworm comes from, and they're very freaky. But it turns out the hummingbird moth is the moth that that comes from this tomato hornworm, which can strip a whole tomato plant or 2 or 3 pepper plants in a couple of afternoons. I mean, you can't see them because they're so camouflaged. They're the perfect mottled green color that matches leaves on your tomato plants. And the only way I find them is when I'm looking for tomatoes, right? Don't we all do that? And we're down like this. And then all of a sudden you'll have this guy, he's looking at you, and you do the jump back. And for a while I did try to let them be. But after I found 3 of them and they completed one, I thought I'll throw them into the chickens. So I do feel bad about it, but it's nature. So I kind of flicked this thing in the middle, and it's a pretty good, let's say 10 by 12 area. And I saw a chicken go up to it. It moved. Chicken jumped. Well, 4 hours later, maybe 6, I don't know. Sometimes all we remember are the events. I came back over to the fence, and found that hornworm climbing up the fence to get out. Nobody had eaten it, and it was escaping. This is when you start seeing some of those old horror movies in your head of Alien and stuff. I think I probably did something else with this worm. I may have tossed him back in there, but it's a hard story. Anyway, appreciate them, understand, because we love the hummingbird moth, and they're exquisite. And what are you willing to trade for that? And the hornworm sort of took me to the edge. At any rate, so after I got started with this and I read this book, and they have all these, they call them food forests, right, that you like to have, and all these perennial edibles that you can just plant and grow for years. And Gilla played a role in accumulating a few of these, like sea kale, which is a perennial, comes back 10 to 14 years, I guess we'd have to say. And it's just gorgeous. You know, it got these beautiful white flowers. It's all edible. The leaves are all edible. You only have to plant it once. So she was one of the things that got me started on having available that. You can buy them she bought them at what was the place that you got the sea kale that's out of business? Yeah. Yeah, they used to have a lot of good choices. But this is where you make friends in a community, because I also get volunteers that come off of mine, and that's where I got Gilla's, was a volunteer. So I'm going to have a sign-up list for a tour at my place, because I'd love to have any of you that can come. We'll do it in the middle of May or something. And creating sort of a community around people together, you can share what you have. Someone has this, you can use this. Someone's had this success, you can try that out. You can ask what climate it grew best for them, and then you can look at where your microclimate is. You can understand a little more sun, wind. Some areas will be drier just because of how porous the soil is. So here's what my yard has now. I have in my perennials auroch, because it came from Gilla, which is a green that's also called mountain spinach. It's very lovely. Lovage, which is a large perennial that's in the parsley family, but it has a celery-like flavor. And it's, I love anything that just comes back. You know, it's just so much more fun than stuff that dies. So I have lovage, I have rhubarb, which does grow well around here generally for people. Let's see, the sea kale, onion and garlic chives. These are all the edible things that are great. And then under the medicinal and bee-friendly herbs, I have one called sweet Sicily, which has a anise flavor. It's also, I think, in the parsley family. And it makes wonderful teas, things like that. I have anise hyssop, thyme, bee balm, yarrow, lemon balm, lavender, echinacea, horseradish, feverfew, lemon balm, horehound, catnip, catmint, calendula, chamomile, tarragon, parsley, oregano, and and comfrey. I had to walk through to find, I kept missing one or two or three. So after that, I have fruit trees. I have 3 apple, I have 1 peach, 1 cherry. I have raspberries, thornless blackberries, black currants, gooseberry, arona berry, service berry, and a josta berry, which is such a fun name, isn't it? I always wonder who came up with that. It sounds like josta berry. It's actually spelled Josta. Yes, and the one I got from Gilla, I planted in not the best spot, so it never quite gets what it needs, and I am going to transplant it one of these days, but it's just a berry, I just said. So one of the things that's mentioned in permaculture are herb spirals. And that is it's a teaching technique that's really lovely. I'm not sure how totally effective it is, but you will create a spiral that's wide, and then build up maybe with rocks, stones, some other manner of what you have available. And then you look at what you plant, where you get sun here, you get shade here, when it's hotter at the top, drier at the bottom. It helps you to understand. I don't know how totally effective it is to actually growing the best things, but it's fun to learn about the idea, and when you're landscaping and you're wanting to add features that draw the eye to what's going on. So I have an herb spiral, and in that I have lots. like most of the herbs I already mentioned. A couple that didn't work out, I found out that Angelica is way too big to put into an herb spiral. It has like, and yes. And then the other thing that I wanted to do was a pond, because I love water sounds. And they'll talk about zones in permaculture too. Like you put things that you're most gonna use, the kitchen garden, or a pond perhaps, because you'll maintain things more that are close by that you see all the time. So I have right to the south, outside where I have a little deck, I have a pond that's probably 2 feet deep, that's maybe 5 feet by 4 feet or something, and a waterfall that comes down. And I love it every time. I just got it started back up again. I'm going to reintroduce fish in it. By the way, it's another learning curve, because I found out that garter snakes eat baby little pond fish. When I first put it in, I was so excited. I got a little group of fish, and all of a sudden I see swimming, and I think, isn't that interesting? I didn't even know. I'd never seen a little snake. Now they live there, right? And I thought, oh, this is fine, sort of. And then on the side where my pond is, there was a couple flat rocks I'd done for a design feature, looked like little steps. And I look over, and that snake was jumping out with a fish in its mouth, jumping up those little steps to go feast on him, which I thought was very rude. I mean, I'd done a lot of work to have the essence of little fish and waterfall, and isn't this lovely? So since I don't want to do damage to things, I caught the snakes, and I took them over to my friend Dave, who we'll talk about in a second, who has a place over here that's bigger, and he doesn't have a pond. Anyway, I relocated, and I do have people laughing at me, and it is laughable. When you do get a net and you get a couple of snakes up in there, and they're jumping around trying to get out, and people make squealing sounds. But it was worth it. It was worth it to me. Another funny story about, sometimes you have neighbors that are a little more curious or nosy, call them. And my neighbor, I went to ask her if it was okay to have chickens. And she said, you won't have roosters, will you? Because they're noisy. I want to tell you, hens are way noisier than roosters. I didn't really realize this. I grew up with chickens, but I didn't realize it. I do now. So I said, no, and we'll just have hens, and we can have 6. And then I got them from Dave and Jeanette. They live right down here again. He's was able to get an incubator, and he has Rhode Island Reds and raising chickens, and I could get the babies, and I got 6 babies from him, and one turned out to not be a girl, right? So all of a sudden, anybody have raised with chickens? So before they really crow, they start making this, something like that. And I thought, oh, darn. Because, they don't really get to live a whole lot longer, roosters, in our climate. People are always putting on Facebook, I have a rooster, you want him? No, nobody can have roosters. So I went to tell my neighbor that by accident, I got a rooster with my hens. He's young, and I know he's starting to make noise, and I will take care of it. And she says, oh, that's okay. What about the ducks? I said, I don't have ducks. And she says, no, I looked for the fence, and I saw a mallard and a hen wandering in my driveway. And so, what about the ducks? And I realized that my fish had been very spooky the last couple of weeks, hiding under things. And those ducks, I'd seen little poop that I didn't know what it was, but it turned out to be ducks. And they didn't stay real long. But, those are the funny things that when you do talk to your neighbors and build community, you find out stuff that you didn't know about. I just really remember that look. Well, okay, I understand you're not going to have a rooster, but what about the ducks you have? Okay, let's see where I was getting on most of my list here. It was nice on what I was doing because I was unincorporated Jefferson County, which is a little easier. If you do live in a HOA, you know, what you plant is going to be problematic. I have other people, the city of Arvada, a good friend that was doing permaculture in her front yard, but it was too wild looking, and she kept having the neighbors call and complain, and they'd come up and say, I realize some are opening up because for a while you couldn't have vegetables growing in your front yard. You could only have grass or trees, shrubs, stuff like that, flowers. So it matters where you live on what you can choose to do. Will say because of doing the garden stuff, I met somebody who did bees, and then I had a friend who was getting swarms, and she said, couldn't you take a swarm? And I said, I don't want bees. And then she said, I have a lot of swarms. I said, okay.
Can you explain what being swarm means?
Do you know what it means when they? I do. I mean, I find out. So every spring, if you have a healthy queen and you have a healthy hive, they will go into, once the pollen starts appearing, or the nectar would be bee feed out in the nature, they will feed up. The queen will all of a sudden go from not laying very many to get through the winter to laying lots of new bees. And then at a certain point, usually it's between, I think mostly April, May, maybe the beginning of June. But in there, when that hive gets so full of extra bees, a cluster of them will leave with the current queen. And they'll leave, usually they'll do that when there's been a larva that the certain bees will decide it's time to feed up that larva, and it will turn into a queen bee and then hatch out of that hive. And then that queen bee, after the swarm is left, she'll hatch. And it's not always consistent on this. Sometimes they'll get 2 or 3, and then the queens are not happy with each other. But basically that virgin queen will fly and mate with a bunch of, the drones or the male bees, and she'll come back, and then that's the only time she'll fly, and then from then on she'll be an active queen laying the eggs in your hive. So the process in the spring of reproducing is that a swarm will leave, and some of you seen swarms? Have you ever seen a swarm? Well, it can be sort of intimidating. All of a sudden, there's a whole lot of bees, and they'll stay with the pheromones of the queen, and then they'll get onto a tree branch, and you'll see that form, and they'll all be hanging around where she's at, and then they'll send out scout bees looking for a new home. Might be in, a tree, an opening, your attic, things like that. And that's when, a lot of the bee clubs, and my friend April was part of this, they'll get the call, there's swarms there, and they'll send someone that's in the club that understands how to collect a swarm, and they'll go out and do their thing, get them in something. That's a whole nother story, but if you're really into bees, we'll talk about it. I gathered a few swarms, but I finally said yes, and I got the bee stuff, and I had honeybees for about 9 years, I think. And it worked well. I mean, I love getting the honey. I did reach a point where I understood that actually honeybees are a European, brought in. They did not evolve here, but they are competing with our native bees for what's available out there. So too many honeybee hives can actually be difficult for the native bees to gather whatever they need to continue on. And native bees, it's a whole new topic. There are bumblebees we know, and leafcutter bees, with maybe some of you know about. They can find a hole in a a concrete wall or in a wooden structure, and the queen will lay her eggs in there and tap it, fill it with mud or stuff like that. They'll wrap them in the leaf. And in the spring, when all of a sudden you go out and you have these rose bushes, and you'll see a perfect little 3/4 circle cut out on all the leaves. Have you ever seen that on your leaves before? That's a leaf cutter bee. And I actually got to see one once. We all have our high points. All the times looking, but there, literally she just went, and that was it. And that little hole, and then that would go in, and a little egg would go in there, and it'd all get rolled up and stuffed in that. And then spring comes, and they'll all hatch out as they go. And some of you have seen some of these tubes and things that they'll put in little houses. It's a thing that people sell at the craft fairs, and they're cute. They can work. You have to be careful, because if they're closed off at the end and they can't be cleaned out naturally, they can hold parasites, molds, things that can damage the viability of the baby larva when it's going to hatch out. Are you here just to talk about garden stuff? No? Okay.
They asked me that back there. I said, no, I'm coming here.
So anyways, we're on the bees, and he asked the question of swarms, and I'd be glad to talk anymore. And my friend April, with some other folks, are part of establishing a bee club in Jefferson County. And bee clubs are great places to go and learn from, and they'll have speakers. And I would tell anybody who's interested in honeybees to go through a year of going to the classes and understanding about it, because there is a commitment to doing it right, which will help your bees survive perhaps more. It is a tricky thing. If you have a neighbor that sprays pesticides on everything, your bees can fly over there, and you can lose a whole bunch of them. There's a much longer conversation around this stuff. So you'd be happy to ask me questions. I can give you the website or the Facebook place, and go to the club and find out more information. But I find that there's a fine balance. You can spend your time understanding what grows where, what native plants can be introduced that that'll work well. You want the ones that are easy, but kind of stay in their place. And some of them you can want to spread, they take over, and then you have to work things out with that. So I guess, I don't know that I've got anything else. Is there specific questions anyone would like to ask right now? And then I know Martin talked about breaking and then coming back, but I'm not sure with time where we're at.
Let's just go into
Yeah. So questions here from anybody on? Yes. I never did. I think that the county extension office you can get test kits there. I really went on I guess in some ways the organic, stack up a whole bunch of great stuff and be patient, because you can test in one area and there could be a minor contaminant there. I've come to really appreciate, it's one of my other books, but some of these you just can't read all of them. Let's see, which is another Paul Stamets one, Mycelium Running. But it really, it gives you an insight into how much we need a healthy mycelium in our soil systems, because they can mitigate chemical damage. They've found, besides like the bees finding them to increase their systems as far as being protected against other invasive diseases. And so, if you can build up a really healthy system. Now, if you're in an area that questions contamination, you should get a soil test. If you're just testing, like, does this soil have the right calcium, nitrogen, phosphates, what kind of things you need. I kind of put everything in it and see what grows well. And
Well, I guess I'm worried about contaminants and if it's toxic. Like
yeah.
I've been trying to grow stuff in the backyard and eating it. I'm just wondering, is there any toxic things?
Yeah, I would talk to the county extension office or something, find a place to, I was pretty sure where mine was that there wasn't any commercialized places that might infect it or impact it, yeah.
What about landscaping rocks? Or
Say that again?
landscaping rocks, lava rocks, are they toxic?
Well, I've never heard of the rocks. I find like concrete things, rocks.
Landscaping rocks.
Yeah, I've never seen a problem. The concrete blocks and things that sometimes they'll use to line a bed with, you would not want to do. And if you're using wood, you would not want that have any kind of paint or stains on them that could leach into. They are treated, yeah.
And specifically, a lot of people like these big blocks that are used for railway tracks.
Yep.
Those are absolutely poisonous, so just stay away from them. They are really, really bad.
Yeah.
A friend of mine in Germany got really deadly sick because he put them in his house to enhance his living room space, and he put them under the ceiling, and nobody knew for quite some time what was wrong. That stuff is so poisonous, and you can imagine when you have it in your garden and your plants take in that stuff, that's really, really bad.
Railroad ties, right?
Yeah,
With creosote.
yeah.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yes.
You wanted to talk a little bit about Dave Bowl.
Dave Braden's, yeah. Yeah, so before, I guess we're still in an okay time frame here. Living Systems Institute, Dave Braden, and he had actually started out calling it Applewood Permaculture, but because he didn't get the design certificate, the permaculture design certificate, which is part of how they train, but it's also design, because he did it on his own. He didn't have that certificate, so they wouldn't let him use permaculture in his name. So we were talking and we decided, he liked it and I liked it, that we call it Living Systems Institute. And I'm on the board there. He is, he's ill now, he has cancer. And we have a group of people, part of our board, that are going to continue on with some of the work that he does. And one of the things I wanted to mention here is that we call it the Re-inhabit Cooperative or co-op. And so sometimes you have homeowners that would like to do more regenerative gardening, but they don't have the time, energy, but maybe they have the resources that they could pay somebody who likes to do that sort of thing. So we have a cooperative where the homeowner might match up with a gardener person, and then a little bit gets donated to Living Systems Institute, to that organization, to keep it able to make whatever, marketing available or information. So they have a website, reinhabit.coop, or at, whatever they say, must be at. And you can sign up and, you could match with somebody, but they're also going to have on May 4th, which I'll mention it, like a potluck gathering over, and it's just like it might be like 2 blocks. It's on the other side of right before the traffic circle there on your right. I have his address. So at 3, 4 o'clock, then we'll do tours then, and we'll talk about different gardening techniques. For a while there, we were able to get a group together that made chicken coops and did some making some bee boxes. He was making some ones that you could put in the tree, and ironically, his one in his tree was the only one that ever got a swarm. The rest of us all got these boxes in our trees that every year, every spring you go out and hope for that swarm to find your bee box, but it doesn't matter. It was an effort that's been fun. And let's see, what So he does a lot of, David done a lot of showing people classes on drip systems, on deep mulch gardening, on this hugelkultur technique and so on, and they're still doing all of that stuff. So ask me more questions about that. Okay.
The reason I asked about this was because it's about permaculture.
Yes.
And on YouTube, at least, I've seen some truly amazing projects where permaculture is applied in the desert, creating unbelievable results within 6 months. It involves manual labor, but
Yep.
often doesn't involve a lot of cost because they reuse all manner of stuff that you may already have.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole idea, is to use what you have available to you, to work with the system that you have. One of my favorite movies to watch that just gives you hope, and it's called Green Gold, and it's by a director, his name's Dennis Liu, L-I-U, which that does make sense, it'd be L-I-U. He talks so fast that I just stop and think. But he started up, this is called ecosystem restoration, and they go into large damaged ecosystem and have found, with planting the rocks, the trees, the bringing back the growth here, you bring that umbrella that has the soil, that they've seen springs that have come alive out of doing these kind of ecosystems and getting the people involved in it. They've done places in Africa. They might have like 20 different restoration camps that are going on now. But a nice thing, he's working also to get an urban ecosystem restoration, to get people with houses to be a part of that, to look at that soil. There's a thing when you put that deep of lasagna gardening or wood chip thing, that you cover an area that'll hold water equivalent to a lake that's 6 inches deep. So, plus it's carbon sequestering. When you add these pieces back into the soil systems, the carbon stays there and evolves as it did, which is why we have oil and gas, that all of those type of systems, but a healthy soil ecosystem. And having grown up on a farm, we're sort of seeing the progression of the damage to the soil systems in large. But we here in the cities, you can rehabilitate your areas and make a difference.
What did you say the name of the movie was?
Green Gold. Yep, and it's just on on YouTube. And you can see some of his other stuff. I actually, every now and then I'll see John Dennis Liu, is his name. And during COVID, he got stuck in California, and he was bored and couldn't do anything, so he was just doing a live chat. And I actually, called in or whatever and got to talk to him for a while about the urban ecosystem. I know there's a area in California that has evolved. I just feel like there could be something here too. And I think with David's Living System Institute, it's a local way of trying to encourage people to get together, to ask questions, to support each other, and to care about the land, soil, bugs, everything, except for maybe those hornworms. Yes?
Peggy, to what extent is WUI, which is wildlands, urban interface, criteria, affecting the permaculture culture? Because I understand with WUI there are zones to protect the main home on the property from fires.
Oh.
That are so much a part of our environment, and it probably will be going forward. I just wonder to what extent WUI is affecting the permaculture thing.
I would have to look deeper at that. With permaculture for sure, where your trees are matter, but it also matters for things like fires. And right now I have too many fences around my area, I mean, my house, it came with them. Now, it does stop the wildlife habitats that might wander through, but I also don't have deer eating everything like my neighbor does, although the deer do jump the fence and try to wander through, but between my raised beds and the kind of things that I have supporting my tomato plants, they can't do much damage. Yes?
CSU Extension, in conjunction with the Colorado State Forest Service, has done a great job in bringing together a little package about that on their website. But they also publish lists of plants that are low flammability. And that's interesting for me to learn about. Oh, okay, you think a living green plant is going to enhance as you said, the water content around the home. But I guess there's more to it.
Yeah, I think that's the big lesson. There's a lot more considerations. Did you guys have any questions on anything? You two up front here.
There's a social justice aspect also.
Of
Many gardeners overproduce, but I know a number of gardeners also in community gardens. We have one in Golden. I hear there's one in Wheatridge, and they give produce to food banks.
yeah, there's so many benefits. I started up a meetup group of called the Golden Organic Gardeners, and I did it for a couple years. It's expensive on one hand, but the enjoyable part of it in some cases was everybody that came were all new to Colorado, and they all came from like South Georgia places, and they would all come in with this wide-eyed, how do you grow stuff here? And all of us have been suffering with these things for, I've come to, understand that they have their own issues, right, with mold and stuff. But it was sort of humorous, like, yeah, it's tough. Yeah, it's not easy. We have to be committed to get stuff growing. Other questions?
I was wondering if you could address watering. Are you using city water, or do you use water catchment or even gray water?
Okay, so Colorado doesn't allow us to accept in. You can get a rain barrel, but it's only passing through. You are not saving that water in bulk for your own purposes. You can't put a tank down that you can draw water off of. Gray water, you can. I had a couple friends that were doing, or a guy was doing a lot of that, which is, I love the idea of gray water. They only want it really to feed trees and things, not your vegetable garden. So you're always aware of that. I have a couple of, an attachment to my hose that does take some of the chemicals that are in our drinking water out when you're putting them into a pond for fish, or sometimes your plants and things. So you always have to think about these things. So does that kind of answer your question a little bit? It's always great to find out any way you can use. This last storm, the big one, when out here, we got that 2 feet of wet snow, which my sump pumps are really wanting to keep running. We don't want power going out with this storm. So much water, Colorado, we tend to get the dumps and then have a month of desert, right? And if we could just save it, but there's part of the time you're just needing to get it away from your house so that you're not soaking up your basement. Any other questions?
One question.
Yes.
Annuals compared to perennials.
Yes.
Bee-friendly planting, is there some better than others? You have a list of things to plant that help bees.
On that pollinator thing, what I would do, what I did was go into nurseries, and the ones that had bees on them were the ones that I took home if I wanted to, or it helped me to identify ones that bees liked. And then most of your herbs, bees love those, and oregano, bees love. We have different, and you can find a list in a lot of places, but not a real difference in annual to perennial as far as you just need ones that haven't been hybridized to be, double leaf where there's no place for the bee to go in and get the pollen. There's lots of things like that. Did you want to say something, Gil?
And one final remark about today's event. What I got out of it is sometimes people think of gardeners as reclusive people who don't like company, and that's why they're toiling. But that's actually not true. There's a lot of community involvement here because you have stuff you need to learn from fellow gardeners who've been where you are now 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And so you start making these connections.
Every day. That's why we love gardening. You always have hope, and you can always learn something new. So.
Okay, so could I have a final round of applause for...
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.